Has any comments, feel free to come on up to the podium. I don't see any members of the public outside of the applicants here, so we will move on to item number 3, which is 2471 Butterworth Drive and other parcels generally identified as Meekoff Properties LLC, Lakeside Aggregates. And there's a request for another year of mining on this site. So what we're going to do is have Dan run through his slides. I think he's done a very good job kind of condensing all the material into a few slides. And then we'll open the public hearing, and then we will ask the applicant to fill in the blanks, both from the presentation and the public hearing, along with board comments. So, Dan, when you're ready, if you would kick off the slide presentation.
Sure, thanks. Thanks everybody for making it today. I'm going to, as Frank said, just run through some background information on this request and orient everybody to the site. Talk about what we were focused in on last year as a board, and if we heard anything from the neighbors, what they commented on. I don't think there were anything for this site, but then to focus on what I recommend based on my observations of the plans from this year's review cycle and some potential conditions to consider on this mine. So here's the imagery of the site. It's a big site, so I guess I just have the one picture, but it extends quite a ways north and kind of wraps around the adjacent site. So you're looking such that north is to the left side of your screen here. Butterworth is on the right side of your screen. So here's the road network and the mine operation as of April to May of 2018 when this imagery was collected. The conditions imposed on this site last year were pretty simple, pretty straightforward conditions that we ask for every year: a letter of credit to be renewed and soil erosion fees to be paid. But some of the things that the board focused on specifically last year was the continual monitoring of some erosion issues on the site, monitoring types of fill materials that were brought into the site. And I know this was talked about for another mine we reviewed last week as well. There was some concern about whether the materials being brought in were inert, whether there was some plastic, some brush, and I think those issues were resolved as of when we monitored soon around the time of the meeting last year. Getting close to the maximum undercut depth in phase 2, which is the difference between what the eventual reclamation of the mine will show in terms of how the floor of the mine will look when it's all reclaimed and what's actually being dug out during active mining. It was being cut low. Clarifying the haul roads, whether there are multiple access points or just the main access drive off of Butterworth. And then when I'm looking at this set of plans this year, I see a lot of reclamation information. It might be helpful to have a standalone reclamation sheet, and looking at the inclusion of the site adjacent in the mining permit at 2472 O'Brien Street Southwest. Clarifying when this topography was last shot for the active portions of the mine, and it was December of 2018, so that's pretty recent. Clarifying what the working slopes are. There are some steep areas. Basically, every mine site has areas where there's steep, sloughed piles of material, which may be different from the 1-on-3 maximum, where the mine operation really should have its edges at a slope less steep than 1-on-3. So that's something that pops up when you're looking at those topo lines. You see a lot of lines close together. Just something to be mindful of, that you want your edges of your mine to be no steeper than 1-on-3. And where there are steeper slopes, make sure you get that safety fence installed. Clarifying the reclamation of certain areas in 2019 to make sure those are going to be 1-on-5 slope, where they're called out as being reclaimed this year. And then what we call edge matching with the adjacent mine site to the east at 1709 Butterworth Drive. That's the Dykema Excavating site. So you're not going to have that do not disturb buffer where two mining operations abut next to one another. What I've been doing this year is just really crude sketches of what I interpret as the reclamation plan for these sites. So on this image and the following one, you have two images showing kind of high points and low points of where the mine will be when it's reclaimed. So that kind of curve on the left edge of this page, or the south end, is Butterworth Drive. So you have basically a mound adjacent to Butterworth Drive, and then you move farther east into the site, you have a low point. And this is the other portion of the site wrapping up into the northeast of the image I just showed. Still south is oriented left, north is oriented right. You have your high points closer to O'Brien Street, low points closer to the southeast corner there. So the recommended conditions for this year, provide a separate reclamation plan sheet for next year, just because of the scale of this site and the amount of information being shown, or a separate sheet would probably be helpful. The topo for 2020 should verify there's no undercutting greater than 5 feet below the reclamation grade. Payments or fence verification letters, and our staff can help to verify if those things have been completed this year, and then any other conditions deemed appropriate by the mining board. So I'm just going to go back to the overall aerial image, and I'm sure the mine operator's design engineer has plans he's going to talk through with you. So we'll leave this image and the overhead camera up so we can talk through the plans.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Why don't we open public hearing and see if there's anybody in the audience with comments or questions? Could we get a motion to do that? Support? Support. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, public hearing is open. If you have any comments or questions about this mine, feel free to come on up to the podium. Going once. All right, how about a motion to close the public hearing? We have support. Support. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Public hearing is closed. Open for board discussion. I will ask the applicants to come on up as well with their engineer and explain the proposal for 19.
Okay, we're live. Sorry.
Board members, feel free.
And then I'll try to describe everything going on here, and then I'll flip over to the center pit, as we call it, the page 2. So basically, what you see on this site is in the front area on the south is basically a fill area, and in 2018 we've got a swath through here where the bank was pushed to the north. And in 2019, this area will be reclaimed. It's going to continue to work to the north, so you'll start to see some of this 1-on-5 taking shape in 2019. And then to the north, you'll still see kind of a sharper bank as we continue to work the fill area to the north. There was not any mineral or any sand mined out of this portion of the site this year. In 2017, we did some mining up here to the north, and it's the intent in 2019 to kind of reclaim that and close up this area on the north. With that, I think that's about the main 2 areas of work, basically fill, and then in 2019, reclamation. A little bit more activity on sheet 2 of the pit. One of Dan's comments, and I'm not sure where, he talked about the undercutting being below 5 feet, and I believe it was in this region along the east line. I noticed this is the city of Walker and the city of Grand Rapids. There was discussion, concern last year because there was a fill that needed to be brought in, and we were kind of trying to figure out how to work with the neighboring property because it's also a sand mine operation, so the bank was moving to the north. We did a couple surveys throughout the year, and if you'll notice, the TOA slope is now to the east of the property line, so we've mined everything that we can mine out of this portion of the pit. And right here where you see this common property line, now here to the north is part of the same, Lakeside Aggregate owns it. It's in the city of Grand Rapids. It's their east pit. It's another active mine. These two floor elevations are gonna match, and it all has to do with the elevation of the good usable material. This is permitted to go down to elevation 644. And as you see right now, we're around 686. So it's all gonna depend on how much good usable material is there and whether it goes that deep. But the intent is to match this floor elevation. So in 2018, the bank continued to the north, and you'll see this is what we're calling phase 2. The bank is gonna continue to the north. In 2019, there's a safety fence here. I was out there a month or so ago, and it was in good shape. It was well marked as you drive through the around the pit. Yeah, I think that's for the most part active mining in here, and then fill on the west pit. So if you have any questions.
Okay, board members, questions, comments? Follow-up from last year on the new conditions, letter of credit and soil erosion fees last year and this year.
So on this page, because you've got it up there, Brent, with the area against the Grand Rapids boundary, you said Beacock owns both sides there?
Yeah, his property starts right here where you see the angle,
Okay.
and then it goes all the way past this jog here up to O'Brien, and then it goes all the way out to Butterworth. It's basically up in here. I don't know exactly where all the property lines are, but it's that whole,
I guess I'm worried about the slope south of that.
through here?
The slope is now just east of the property line.
Yes.
They don't own that?
No, that's Dykema, I believe. Mr. Schimmel's in the audience.
Is there an agreement worked out there? Because it'd be perfect if you guys could do a straight line up and down, but if you go to the toe of that slope and pull all the sand off the slope down into your property, we should probably have something to clarify that agreement and what, you said contour 644 was approved, but
That's on the, to the,
dramatic, so we should probably get something to show that.
right now the plan is to go down to 690. That's what we're anticipating, which is gonna match where the existing property line is, the property corner. And then this material will all come out as well.
Okay, I think during your talk, though, you mentioned that there was an approved floor elevation there of 644
Yes,
on the Grand Rapids side?
yes.
So-
That's the original plan for the center pit and the east pit was to go down to elevation 644 through all of this.
Okay, but it's,
That's been that's kind of been revised as the pit's evolved, as the material's taken out of there.
you know where I'm going though, right? Just want to see,
Get an agreement?
well, just show that that's not an encroachment and that Walker's not letting somebody run crazy all over the property line and steal sand from a neighbor, and make sure that we know that the contours are going to be, worked up in an appropriate way. Because if you get the 690 contour coming down to that property line and you're allowed to go to 644 down there, that's a pretty big difference.
Yep, so just an agreement between the property owners.
And the reclamation contours, I think that include that entire slope. Between, I'm sorry,
There is an agreement between ourselves and VCOG on the property line that
when you say yourselves, you mean Dykema?
Dykema's doesn't own that, developers does.
Okay,
we can get you a copy of that.
That would sure help.
Where are we at on soil erosion fees and fence letter for this year? Do you know that, or?
We have a fence letter, right? We do not have a current bond payment.
For soil erosion fees, I spoke with Brent this morning and cleared up the disturbed area and updated that fee. I emailed it along pretty soon after your last email. I wasn't able to draft a formal letter for that. Let me know if you need one. And then just to follow up on another item that Dan mentioned, the erosion monitoring. We had several site visits to look at that. I spoke with the DEQ. It's an older area, and we agreed with the opinion that it was unsafe to fully repair and that it was kind of stable as is. So that issue has been taken care of and settled.
Okay, further comments?
Can we shift to the west pit? I know you said there hasn't been any mining in here, and I tried to go back and tap into questions from last year a little bit, but the elevation between phase 2 and phase 3, underneath the large number 2 in the center of the page, there's a 32-foot difference there between what's out there and what's proposed, and that seems to be pretty consistent through that whole area. Is Dan, that where you were talking about the undercutting over excavation?
Phase 2 from last year was the point where I think we were focused on. That may have been referring to the east property line area that Brent talked about. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to right now, but it's worth zeroing in on that.
I guess I'm just thinking about the significant amount of additional trucks taking material out that requires more trucks bringing material back, and then we end up with grades that we don't know how dense that is. I know this is one of those areas we don't have an end-use plan because there can't be one, anything significant at least, but I still don't think we wanted to see cuts that were over 30 feet. You know, I think 5 foot's the number. So we should probably try to have that addressed somehow on this plan.
So this has been pretty much this fill operation. It's been the same amount. It's been brought all the way from the south working north, 30 feet, 40 feet all the way through.
Yeah, but right underneath your hand there, I mean, there's a 30-foot over excavation, and that's what we're supposed to be watching out for. So I'd like to see, even though you're not mining anymore in that area, at least for now, I'd like to see some kind of a note on there that you guys have acknowledged that and you're working towards bringing that back with adequate density, you know, per the ordinance.
Okay.
Hopefully somebody else has some thoughts on that too. I don't want to be the only one. But while you're on that page, the wells that are on the north, let's see, the west side of the page, the top. Yeah, is there anything that needs to be done with those? A lot of those lines look like they're underneath, or they would logically be underneath the end contours.
Yeah, we'd work with the wells have been raised and lowered throughout this mining operation. So it's just working with the owner of the well.
Can you add a note about that? Just
To adjust the
something
well
simple
height.
that you're going to be getting those down to grade. Obviously, we don't want all that mess just going into the ground.
They'll know too if they can't get to the wells.
Yeah, well, and we've had problems on other sites where they were left with huge teepees with power poles and wells, and then they walk away and don't want to come back. So we should get it cleaned up first time around.
Okay, so Dan has given us a list of potential conditions of approval here. And Dan, if you don't mind, I'm just going to summarize those for the group and then add on what I've heard so far. Provide a separate reclamation plan sheet for 2020's review. Topographic data provided for the 2020 submittal should demonstrate that there is no undercutting greater than 5 feet below reclamation grade. Do we want to cover that for the whole site, or is it just on what you're talking about here on the west mine, Scott?
Well, we should never have to say it. That's why I feel I'm being a mean guy by bringing it up, but, you know, the max is 5 feet, and we're at 30+ feet, and some of these other mines are the same way, so.
So they need to correct
If we have
that.
to call it out every single time, that's gonna be a real pain in the butt, but,
Yeah.
But this
It
site's
should be
different
addressed.
being, this site being undermined by the gypsum, historically, we talked about that not being an issue.
not as big of an issue. We still don't wanna have, you know, huge sinkholes out there because the, you know, it's loosely compacted material has gone in 30, 40, 50 feet deep.
And they're not doing that, so.
Okay, so that one I've heard, and we can clarify. Soil erosion monitoring should continue, that'll go through.
That's satisfied.
That's satisfied? Okay, so that box is checked. The performance bond fence verification letter, sounds like we have the fence verification letter, but not the performance bond. So we'll need that bond by March 1st. And then what I've heard discussed here, and feel free to adjust this, in addition to the reclamation contours being adjusted, a copy of a written agreement with the developer's mine operator to the east, and oil wells to be cut to grade. So further comments from the board? Staff?
I just want to clarify, based on our conversation about undercutting, I am realizing more and more that what we're talking about here is especially on the west wing of this site. We have existing topo, and the issue is that the reclamation that's proposed is some 30 feet above existing. So we're not talking about anything having to do with current mining. We're just talking about lessening the severity of the fill that's brought in.
Okay.
Is that accurate, Scott? Do you think that's,
I think it was mined at some point, we just keep overlooking it.
yeah? So we're talking about a less severe amount of fill being brought into that portion of the site, if I'm interpreting that correctly. And that would have to be compaction tested, I think, to 90% if it's not going to be built on at the time of the end use being approved, or the final inspection being done. That's not a new condition, that's just me talking through understanding one of those conditions.
And like Scott said, and like you've said, Dan, that kind of stuff is in the code too. So, you know, it's not like this is a new site. Okay. Well, if we don't have any further comments from the applicant or from the group, going once, and I would ask someone to craft a motion with the conditions that we've been discussing.
I could craft a motion, but I wanted to kind of clarify what we were going to say regarding the undercutting item. Do we want to make that a condition, or kind of what direction are we going in that with that?
I had asked for a note on the plan about density.
About what?
Density, because, I mean, that's in the code as well, but if we're gonna get this far off on the contours, we should make it very clear so that next year when we see that again, we can see that there's a note there, we've covered it. I think that'd be satisfactory for that spot.
So Frank, where do we stand with oil wells being monitored? It's a separate owner.
If it's a separate owner, well, Brent, help us out. How have you done that in the past?
Usually the owner will be contacted and they're out there on a regular basis, so Doug always just met with them and they brought it up or lowered it. So, Doug, that's a pretty simple transaction with getting the well raised and lowered.
Yeah, we were with Pat on that. We went to the south there, we lowered them and then raised back up. And Pat's in agreement to do the same thing. We lowered that one, then we put it back up and then go back up.
Okay, does that answer your question, Dan?
I didn't know if there was a problem with that, if it has to be stipulated this year or anything like that.
Well, that I'll leave to Scott to craft about when those need to be done. And we're getting some feedback through the mics, but sounds like they're good to all oil well operations on this site. Okay. So feel free to shake out that motion however you want and offer it when you're ready.
I'll just jump right in. I'd offer to approve the mining application for this year, accommodating the recommended motions or the recommended conditions from Dan, and adding 3 new ones. First, that an agreement be provided with Developers, Inc. to the east to cover the mitigation of that slope. Second, that the oil wells be relocated to below the reclamation contour and a note be added to the plan as such. And 3, that density calculations be provided for the areas with fill greater than 5 feet, and a note be added to the plan to clarify that.
The only other one I have is a performance bond or letter of credit to CDD by March 1st, 19.
I'll accept that into the motion.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have support? Support by Gary. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Permit approved for 2019. All righty, next item on the agenda is a sand mine permit request for 4480 Burton Street Southwest and 2496 Kenaway Avenue Southwest, generally called Shoemaker and Sons Hauling. So Dan is going to walk us through some more slides. And this is a site that is slowly transitioning into what it's master planned for. So we will take a look at this, follow the same process as last time, slides and public hearing, then applicant and board comments. So Dan, feel free to take it away.
All right, thanks. Similar format here, different set of issues for this mine. So here is your context. Here's the view of the site. This time oriented toward the north. That's Burton Street, wrapping around the north end of the site. Off screen a little bit to the right side or to the east is Wilson. This is what the site looked like on April 20th of 2018 was when that image was taken. The only condition stated last year was to reclaim the area along the Schwartz property by June 1st of 2018. And I'd want to cross-reference our department's notes, anything we have on that with Rachel. I don't know if there were soil erosion inspections that verified that, but we certainly want to track our progress on that condition moving forward. And other observations we had last year, we were catching up on some concerns and some topics of conversation that we had at that time last year. So one thing we were looking at was consistency with the Subplan 2 future land use plan, how this site would eventually redevelop in terms of, and I put some bullets in here that are just kind of snippets of kind of a summary of some of the things talked about in that master planning document. So how will water and sewer availability affect this area of Walker? Conversion from industrial closer to the river up to more residential and rural residential farther north. Will there be a road through this property eventually? Then zooming back out to the plans at hand, some of the things we're looking at were steep slopes on the northeastern portion of the site that should be stabilized, and I think that's also the area shared with that Schwartz property. Need for compaction tests and adequacy of fill material to be verified. What's the future drainage pattern of the site when this site gets reclaimed and restored? And water table and well impacts. So there are a number of neighbors with wells with potentially shallow water tables. We want to make sure that this site is not impacting those. And just to kind of track that and note that as a concern to make sure that this site's floor is not undercutting some of the adjacent wells, which we've looked at various points in the past. So the new plans, we still want to make sure we're verifying the reclamation of the Schwartz property. It's a time of year where it's hard to look at that, but I know we had some a site visit or two last summer to look at that. So Maybe staff knows where we stand on that issue, and if not, we'll try to move forward and understand where the progress of that is. What's the end use plan for this site? And are we going to reuse what we've had in the past for kind of an end use concept? But we should get something on file that the mining board can feel comfortable with in terms of an end use plan. Are there undercutting or over excavation concerns? Concerns about the well water table again? Making sure the working slopes at the edge of the site are no steeper than 1 on 3. And a note about the existing topo being December 12th, just like with the other mine site. If I was reading the comments from the design engineer correctly, the topo was taken on the same day as the other site. So those are just my observations of the plans that we have now. Here is a picture of the reclamation plan for the site. North is on the left side of your screen now. Sorry if that's confusing based on the other slides. So Burton is on the left side, Wilson is on the top here. So the site is basically going to be split in terms of drainage if this reclamation plan holds true. So you have kind of a ridge in the center, and then drainage is going to move to the north and to the south. And the highest point is up there near Wilson and Burton, which makes sense if you drive by the site now. You're dropping off pretty steeply in to the southwest end of the site. So recommended conditions, we've made reference to this site wrapping up and potentially an end-use plan. We don't have a current new end-use plan. We don't have a for sure timeline of completion, so I think we should get some statement about when they estimate mining will be done here. Separate reclamation plan sheet should be provided in 2020. Go through the motions of checking the status of the payments and fence verification letter. Slopes not to exceed 1 on 3 at the edges of the site, and undercutting not to exceed 5 feet, and any other conditions the board finds appropriate for this site. Again, I will put the aerial image up, and the design engineer has plans you will probably want to talk through.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Why don't we open the public hearing, if I could get a motion for that?
So moved.
Support?
Support.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, public hearing is open. If you have any comments or questions regarding this mine application, feel free to come on up to the center podium. Going once. Okay, I have a motion to close the public hearing. Support? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. Why don't we have the applicant come on up and engage in the board, with the board on comments that are raised by Dan, conditions from last year, and then proposed conditions for this year. And while you guys are getting set, do we know if we have the fence verification letter and the bond? Okay, so those boxes are checked. And Rachel, how about from a soil erosion standpoint?
Soil erosion fee has been paid, and I have a copy of the receipt up here if you'd like it.
Okay, so those 3 procedural items are taken care of, and I'll hand it over to Brent and the board for review.
Brent DeRose with Naderveld. Mr. Shoemaker is in the audience as well. Again, he's very involved with the site. He's out there on a regular basis, making sure everything's getting done the way it's supposed to. In the aerial that was just up, you may kind of notice this little dashed outline. That was where the bank was when we did our topo in 2017. So you can see that it's significantly moved to the north. The oil well was coordinated and lowered, so now it's on the floor of the pit. And basically what you see kind of right through this little area in the northwest corner is the material that remains to be mined from the site. And we're at elevation 664. This property hasn't been undercut. It's been down to the floor grade, and it's just continued to work to the north. There's been kind of a natural high point, or there was a design high point in the middle of the property, basically graded at 1% both ways from there. So the property's going to drain off to the north, and it'll intercept this 662-ish grade down at the northwest corner. The future contours are gonna be pretty close to where there's an existing 2-track. So in 2018, one of the conditions was to reclaim the property behind the Schwartz property, reclaim the bank, and it was much steeper in here. It was below, I think it was steeper than a 1-on-3 through this region, and this material's all been put back along the bank, and it's also wrapped around the corner, so you can see it's right about the 1-on-5 grade. Bob was waiting to get the topo back, get everything checked, before we did our compaction test and spread the topsoil and seeded it. So it's definitely at the grade it needs to be. It just needs to be reclaimed in 2019. So that's the area of focus. And mining will continue to the northwest. And to answer one of Dan's questions, we're estimating about a 5-year plan before this is all wrapped up, and based on the market demand and how fast the material goes. There's still a little bit of trees that need to be removed as it gets up to the north, but you basically, where we've got the area to be mined in 2019 is when you go out there, you can see where the trees are removed and it's ready to go. So again, focus in and probably start up here toward the north and then continue to fill in the bank behind us. And so we got a spot for fill and sand to be mined out of the site.
Okay, board members, comments, questions?
I just have a tough time. You figure 5 years to complete reclamation and everything, or
Yeah, to have all
have
the
you done mining all?
we're trying to be a little conservative. We don't want to overpromise, and there's still material out of the to be removed out of the site. So, if there's a couple of good years, it could go faster. If it's not, then he's trying to give a realistic time frame.
Seems like this site might benefit from the ability to have that end-use plan looked at by the planning commission, so that you didn't have like an interim reclamation stage and then a development stage. And whether Bob wants to do that or have somebody else do that in the future, it could help save you a step.
And let me chime in on that if you would. Let me bring up the master plan quickly. We did a separate master plan called a sub-plan for this site. More than 10 years ago now, we're going to pick up a wider expanse of South Walker. And really the issue is, we're going to do that this year. Dan and I will do that along with Scott, because the big issue is public water availability and density. Those two things go together down there. Mr. Hibma to the south owns a lot of property. The Weathers do as well. And I know they have some plans. So the best I can say to you, if you're going to put together a reclamation plan, is have it consistent with the 2008 Subplan 2, which for this site is residential, not to exceed 1 unit per acre. So whatever the yield total property is, divided by 1 unit per acre, and that's the allowed housing on that site. What we put in Subplan 2 was that number of houses can be clustered based on your final reclamation plan, just in case the site has some slopes or whatever that are more unusable. But I think that's what we'd be looking at for an end-use plan, consistent with the master plan.
Are you happy with the water well conditions? I mean, if they've been addressed?
Scott, do you want to handle that, or Rachel, or?
Pretty much. Are we good there? I mean, sure, it's got to be monitored, but it's been taken care of.
I think there's been notes that have been added to the plan that direct them to stay out of the water table. So as soon as, help me out, Brent, but as soon as you get down to the water table, if you catch yourself doing that, you're supposed to stop and then put 3 feet of clay over the top, I believe, right?
Yeah, there was an area up near the to the south where it was dug. I want to say about, I don't know, there was an area that was getting chased with sand and got a little deep, and that's what we did. We backfilled it with clay and closed it off, and had a hydrogeologist, I believe, at the time look at it, and make a recommendation. So that's where you see the note on the plan. Number 13.
And Dan, I think you might have been out in the field for one of the meetings we had with Health Department in the field. So when we heard complaints about potential tapping into the water wells to the west, we asked Health Department to come on out and verify, what needed to be done to protect that local aquifer. And if that issue comes up again, then we'll, I assume, get Health Department back out there. But I think what I remember is from last year, and check me if I'm wrong, that they weren't getting into the aquifer. It was more of a surface runoff or a seep coming through the side of the non-working face of the mine in the northwest corner.
And I think Bob was really workable with that too. He didn't want to mess with that. As soon as it was discovered, it was a kind of a joint effort to try to remedy it as quick as possible.
Thank you.
Okay, further comments or questions? Well, then if you would start thinking about crafting a motion, Dan has recommendations, and I've heard a couple of things talked about here. If anything, I would recommend that a reclamation plan be consistent with the master plan as currently approved. And again, we talked about allowable density on this site for single-family homes. And I will consider a motion if someone has one available. We already did the public hearing, right? Yes, we did. Don't confuse me. I'm losing, my short-term memory is ruined.
Me too, apparently.
Yes, all right. So who is willing to craft a motion with some conditions?
I'm taking a stand against crafting motions.
It would be helpful, Mr. Connors.
What other conditions do folks have here? I think we've worked through most of the stuff. Is there anything that's not listed in Dan's recommendation? Most of my notes, it seemed like they've been covered.
I think one of mine was complete reclamation at Schwartz property in 2019, which is just that topsoil and seed.
And the plan has a note there, so we should be good. I think the grades have been established, and it's just about getting the vegetation now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I move to approve the mining permit with the recommendations noted by the planning director.
Do we have support for that motion?
Support.
All right, further discussion? Hearing none, then all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, you have your permit for 2019. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, we have the process of closing out the Mines Golf Club sand mine operation at 2301 and 2311 O'Brien Southwest. So I see Mr. Schimmel in the audience. This again is a public hearing. And we have minutes from our November meeting. We met a couple of times on this property last year. And we are running up against some conditions and some closeouts. So I'm going to let Dan run through the slides to bring us up to speed.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Chair. This format is again similar, but the decision points the board has to make on this one are going to be a little bit different because now we're transitioning into the ceasing of sand extraction for sale off-site and transitioning more into reclamation and moving around soil on-site pursuant to an end-use approved site plan. So I think the board is pretty familiar with this case, but I'll go back through some background and context anyway. Here's an image that was taken, and I think quite a bit of change has happened since this image was taken, but this was taken sometime early 2018. You're looking east at the top of the screen here, so toward Koval, where you access the site a few hundred feet to the east of where this image stops, and then to the north is on the left side of the screen, and there's established couple of condominium developments, so that kind of orients you to the site. In November, the last thing that the board focused on was the kind of in-progress plans after the Planning Commission had approved basically an end-use plan or a site plan. So the conditions imposed based on that review were that all mining activity had to be complete by March 1st of this year ahead of a restoration permit. The maintenance of a 30-foot buffer along the east end of the property line to be maintained. Yeah. Oh, that's good to know. Oh, okay, good. There's a ecology lesson for the day. So maintaining that 30-foot buffer, and to support that is being done, we also asked that and for other reasons, we asked that a existing topo plan be provided by mid-January of this year. We have a topo plan dated January 23rd, which in some ways is even better, even more recent information for the board to look at. I'll talk about that. One of the conditions 2 and 3 relate, because condition 3 shows that there's still an undisturbed area on the eastern edge of the property as of the January 23rd topo that shows that 30-foot do not disturb area has not been touched yet. So what did we focus on last year? There was a lot to cover. We're looking at mining operations as well as end use and concerns relating to both of those things. So we focused on a specific volume of sand mining. So going back all the way to the, I think, March 2018 meeting, it says March 18, there was a limit imposed on the total yardage of extraction coming off of this site, 125,000 cubic yards. Monitoring stockpiles of material that I think Rachel had been looking at the previous year on the northwest edge of the site and making sure that that area was becoming stabilized. Completing the mine. At that time, we were looking at having the mine being completed by the end of the year and wondering if that was still a limit that we were imposing on the mine or that the board was imposing on the mine. Verifying the remaining excavation volume. Looking at the reclamation redevelopment process, so turning this mine into a golf course, looking at accurate new topography on the plans, which we now have, the origin of fill materials, the destination of the sand coming off the site, what are the logistics of what's coming in, what's going out, whether tree plantings would occur along the north lot line. This was a specific resident concern from one of the condo residents to the north. Concern about trespassing, truck noise on the site, some kind of operational concerns that came up in public comments at the meeting. I'm kind of bouncing around here, talking again about tree preservation, this time on the east lot line, whether that was a condition of approval as part of the Planning Commission's approval of the golf course, or whether those trees may not be preserved. And then the mining end date, kind of redrawing that line in the sand of when mining would be done, no pun intended. So what are we looking at now when we have a new set of plans? I wanted to analyze the current topo that's being shown here. I think I had a drawing in the packet, or at least in my comments to the mine design engineer, that show kind of a low spot in the middle of the mine site, and then the workings around that in terms of where there's still sand extraction being done. There's a low spot in the middle. The eastern edge is steeper than the eventual reclamation plan, so there's going to have to be some feathering out of that slope. The excess beyond 1-on-3 slopes in some areas. Specific to reclamation plan requirements, there's a lot of detail now on the first of 2 plan sheets that you see, and I'm sure the design engineer, I'm not sure if Todd Stivey's here, but we can lay the plans out and look at that stuff. There's quantifying the amount of the areas and the amount of materials that will have to be used to reclaim the site. So it's a pretty thorough reclamation plan that's been provided with that plan dated 2/7. And then looking forward, transitioning into closeout mode, what we're going to need to see in some form is a set of plans that are surveyed, sealed, that show as built that the mine was completed to the approved reclamation plan, if the reclamation plan is approved today. So that's going to have that as-built component to it. There's going to be a soil stabilization plan that it should be following, driveways, stormwater infrastructure, signage, buildings. Those 2 points, the driveways point and the signage buildings point, are things that I think were adequately covered during the Planning Commission's review of this site, because there was a plan for a specific golf course end use that had a driveway, a small building that actually got removed. So all those items are on the end use plan that was approved by the Planning Commission. But there are other points of end use information we want to see, like the documentation that on-site wells have been cut to the reclamation topography, which is something that came up in the last couple of mines that we just talked about. And on the backside, when the reclamation is done, to verify that the site has been restored and reclaimed appropriately pursuant to those plans, the city engineer and the DPW director will go inspect the site with presumably some other staff, perform a site visit, and then a public hearing will be held once the mine has been complete and verified as complete. So that's further down the road. So just before we get back into kind of moving ahead into the process, what we're looking at right now in terms of the plans we see, and I did have this image on there. This is on the left side of the screen what the topo is like as of January, so as of about a month ago. You have the low point in the center of the site, and off to the west end there's some wetlands. So the reclamation really seems to be about kind of feathering down that slope towards the middle of the site, peeling into that 30-foot do not disturb area based on that area being exempted as part of the end use for a golf course. So you're going to see shallower slopes going up to the property line, and some of that material being moved down into the basin of the site, presumably fill being brought to the site as well. But as of the end of the month, at least according to the last approval, there would be no more off-site sand, extraction of sand to be sold off-site in terms of mining. So there's a lot to go through here, but based on the plans that I see and my understanding of the process, I have some recommendations that I invite the Mineral Mining Board to tweak based on what they hear today from the applicant and from many of the neighbors. But I do think we should maintain that March 1st end date for excavation and off-site hauling, which is really the kind of the meat and potatoes of sand mining. Based on the schedule provided, reclamation should begin. The Mineral Mining Board should inquire about how much and over what time span the fill material is estimated to be brought into the site during reclamation. Based on a schedule that's provided on the plans, I'm making some numbers in the rest of my bullet points here based on their proposed construction schedule, but I think it's a reasonable schedule, so I think it's good to follow that. Based on the schedule provided, stabilization should be complete by summer of 2020. Reclamation update, just in terms of a kind of a site inspection and a report update, or perhaps another trip to the mining board, should be done this August. If we're going to have another round of mineral mining meetings, it would be a good idea to have some sort of a formal update with the mining board. Topographic plan should be provided at the end of in March 2020 at the next mining board meeting. Actually, that should be February 2020. There are conditions from the Planning Commission meeting reviewing the golf course that should be met, and so that's that 9/5/2018 meeting that I'm referring to. There's a number of small conditions related to getting a new stormwater permit for the golf course, verifying the access drive is a suitable material, some more kind of site plan and layout based conditions. Then finally, based on the timeline that's proposed here, I think it's reasonable to ask that now that we're moving into the reclamation redevelopment stage. As-built should be provided, final on-site inspection should be completed, and public hearing for the closeout should occur by the end of next August, or earlier if deemed appropriate by the mining board. And again, that's based on the schedule that's provided here, so any fluctuation to that schedule should really be proposed and reviewed through you folks at the mining board. So to really summarize broadly, I think the process now is about moving this site into that reclamation stage where you're moving soil around within the site and then stabilizing the site. So that's a process that should be following a specific plan that we then field inspect in sometime in the next year when it's done.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Why don't we get a motion to open the public hearing?
I'll make a motion.
And do we have support? We have support as well. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All righty. If you have any public comment, questions, concerns about this mine operation, please feel free to come on up to the podium. Going once. One gentleman.
Terrence Barkley here. Paul Henderson. Oh, wait, I was not advised of this public meeting. I've never received anything in the mail. I heard that a couple of occupants nearby received something. I'm Greenleaf Farms. I have 120 acres, which is not just in the vicinity, but it's contiguous for the west side of the project. The project in particular where the new 12 greens are proposed. So left of that, as I looked at elevations, you advise me if I'm incorrect, but the elevations were in the 700s, and as you go west down that, go down in the 600s or less. Contingent to that, all that water inevitably is going to flow west. Now, there's history here. I don't see anything in regards to retention ponds. And the reason I'm mostly concerned of that is the history thus far. There's a line coming in, a 36-inch line, coming in from the Lake Michigan Drive exit. Two streets are there involved. And as that line came in, the question was, many years ago, will this affect the water that flows normally and naturally, historically, since the Indians left arrowheads on that land? And as building continued and that storm pipe, that 36-inch, if I have a storm, just a nice rain, I love rain, etc. If it lasts for a day and a half or two, I could stand at my property in my yard and it's dry. And suddenly there is a deluge. It's like watching a flashlight. It comes down. Contingent to that is what it takes with it is rather significant. In the past, it's taken my bridge. By the way, it's a fantastic bridge. It's stress cement, etc. If it doesn't take it out, it undermines it and it flows over the top. Other things which are more cosmetic that I'm not as concerned with, let's say a humpback bridge that was kind of custom made and placed over. It's down. It's down by Bryan Street. A couple hundred yards away. So far I can take it, except those are personal considerations. I never knew why there wasn't a retainment pond there. And in fact, called up the road commission years ago. I said, well, that's just the way it is. There's more people who are developing there, more water involved, etc. When I visited this site, walked it, drove on it, etc., and then looked at your plants, it's inevitable that water is going to run to the west. And in so doing, my property isn't next to it, it's contiguous to it. That hillside is my hillside. And I share
voted for it. I like green instead of simply shrubbery, et cetera. But and I'm not an expert, as I consulted museum, et cetera, and so on, there's pretty much a consensus that the only place that water can go is west. Now, I understand there's some wetlands there. I'm really familiar with the wetlands. And again, I own 20 acres, and of course, that's the area where the wetlands are. I'm almost, and by the way, it doesn't matter, he's a long ways away, but my son is an engineer, does engineering work for Michigan Tech and teaches safety there and so on. But it just seems impossible the way those 12 greens are laid out, and having walked it, et cetera, and have experienced the existing flooding that occurs, not because of that per se, but the flooding from up above. This has to be an addition of that water that is going to make not the existing temporary flooding, which is a nuisance, and I've lost property in doing that, but it's going to make it great. And I see nothing when I look at the elevations, et cetera. The only way that water can go is west. And then I notice there's wetlands slightly to the northwest. Those wetlands get full of water very readily. And this additional water would be over the top. So rather than bitch and moan about it, if it happens, and again, I wasn't aware of this meeting. For some reason, I'm an occupant, I own 120 acres, and I'm not accusing anybody at all. I came here, a neighbor said, Terry, what do you think of the meeting that's going to occur? I said, well, no problem. When does it occur? He says, well, it's on the board now. It's next week. So, again, I did my own research, consulted with good people, and Paul is here with me today, or rather John is with me today. And I am concerned that one makes considerations to preclude that before it's shaped, developed, and so on. By the way, I love the land. I think the golf course is a great asset for the community. But again, there's great responsibility, I think, on the part of the designers to do not what's necessary once that drainage is created, but to preclude it from holding ponds, et cetera, retention ponds. And I'm not an expert in that. I mean, I have access to expertise. But rather than fighting the pool, I would like to do whatever I can to preclude the program with your help and your knowledge and your expertise. So that's why I'm here today. I would appreciate, as we look into the future, any consistency in how we can go. And by the way, I have, and I will take them again, I have pictures of that lowland there that runs parallel, north and south to the property you're talking about. It can be a nice summer day, it's fairly dry. It was an original stream. Actually, it was a shrub stream use. But I can see it, and once that water begins, you can really see flash flood coming. So, I make my point. I would, I'll spend as much time and help with you with the commission, with expertise, et cetera, and you have much more expertise than I have. But I really am concerned about precluding that water coming in. And it's just not a preference. It's a serious issue that really needs to not happen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir, for those comments. Any other comments from the public? All righty, hearing none, look for a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Support. All those in favor say aye. Aye, opposed. Okay, public hearing is closed. I will open the discussion up with the board members, and then if the applicant, Mr. Schimmel, can come on up, maybe address some of the questions that were raised, particularly about drainage and grading. But I think Dan's right. We finally gotten to the point where the mining will end on this site on March 1st. We've been working towards that, so I think that's the most important takeaway point. And then we can talk about crafting what I'll call a mining closeout initiation permit, not a mining permit, as things come together here with discussion. So this is Dan Schimmel. He is the mine operator. I will have Mr. Schimmel try to discuss his plan, his reclamation plan, especially as it relates to drainage, and then board members feel free to step in. Mr. Schimmel, take it away.
I think we've, both in the planning commission and here, we've discussed it quite a bit. I guess if there are specific questions that you have, I guess I can answer those. The water issue from Mr. Portfleet, this area has traditionally gone to the west. We haven't created any different avenues. The water traditionally has come off the adjoining property here to the east, or to the east. I think there's 6 or 7 property owners. That water comes from the area around 3, and it comes back into the wetlands between 4 and 5. And then a good share of the water comes towards the power lines, kind of down the road, heads through kind of the back of the driving range, where it's collected into a storm sewer system and goes to the ditch on the Portfleet property. That pipe was put in long before I was around. That was put in by Georgia Pacific, and I don't know all the history. Terrence would probably know that better than me, but I do know somewhere in this area, and I think it's more under the power lines where it was what's called the Portfleet well, which took the water out of the mines into that storm sewer that runs behind our driving range onto the Portfleet property. And I don't know when that occurred. You know when that? Portfleet well that we shut down years ago when we bought the property was right here. And then there's a line, and it's not shared on this property, that goes into a sump and then goes back. And I've never seen the outlet on your property. It comes out in here. That's been there for, well, longer than 15 years. I know that because it was there when we bought the property.
Mr. Schimmel, my concern is not enhancing any way the disruption of adding more water.
I don't think we're going to add more water. Most of the water that comes there now a lot of it comes from up in here, and here again. This whole area drains to the west, as you said, and so we've kind of maintained it out into here underneath the power line. We've maintained it out there. The water that has been transferred, has been come on site, actually has been staying on site because we've dug some big containment wells ponds to handle the water just so it doesn't go off site. And then quite a bit, and you've referenced quite a bit of the water comes from the condos and Lake Michigan Drive, it's a bigger than 36-inch pipe that comes into that creek, which flows through the wetlands. So we have, and we are, and some of this reclamation plan has containment area between 7 and 8. That is where a good share of 9, 10, 7, 8, 11 will go. Certainly 3, 4, and 5 are going to follow the contour going into the wetlands. 12 and 6 will, go into the wetlands. 12 will come to the south and then follow kind of where the bulk of the water coming in off the adjoining, I think that's about a 40 or 50 acre parcel, and that's that water comes off Fulton, or not off Fulton, I forget the name of the street there, but basically all that property, that 50, 60, 70 acres, all comes to the south and to the west. And
Hagedon Drain,
what? Pardon me?
Hagedon, maybe?
I don't know what I don't even know if it's ever been named. It basically sheds. There's really no creek there. There's, when you have 60, 80 acres of shed, and this is where it ends, you get quite a bit of material, or quite a bit of water. So we've tried to figure out how best to maintain ours and slow, we can't stop the water from coming onto our property. That's been coming on this property for many, many years, and there's plenty of laws and rules and how that has to be taken care of.
Could you say that you've dug holes in different areas to create loss, but you're trying to contain the sedimentation and control it? Would that be?
During this operation, we have, and in the course of building the other course, we have done the same thing as what we've built, dispersing areas, and have slowed it down. If you look at, I don't know how you're familiar with our existing golf course, the 8 holes of par 3, and all that water comes from the power lines, meanders through the golf course, and there are several areas where it collects, it slows down, and then there is a old mining area. You can see it from O'Brien, and it's probably a 2-3 acre piece of property that we didn't put, we vegetated, and it's dune grasses and stuff like that, but that's where the water, predominantly most of the water ends, percolates out, but then there is no outlet there, but we've never had it overflow. It just gets into the sand and goes back down into the mines. So it has been looked at. The engineer or the architect that will do the building has done a good job on the existing course, and from what both Excel and Mike have created here, should take care of, or at least isn't going to increase the water.
Okay, not to get into the technicalities, but there's 2 things going on. We're going to close, the sand mine will be closed out gradually, according to this reclamation plan.
Well, not gradually.
Yeah. Well, we're looking at August 20, 2020 as-built wrap up, so that's a ways
Well, the
out.
sand mining is done.
As of March
All
1st.
right, that's not gradual.
Yeah, well, but the reclamation's going to take a while.
Gradual, yeah.
And so we're working towards a reclamation plan. The Planning Commission has approved the golf course plan. In between all of those is stormwater permitting and soil erosion. And maybe if we can discuss those a little bit to see what the city is going to be getting involved with as far as the transition here.
All right.
City of Walker and the city of Grand Rapids in regards to the state of affairs of the water and the drainage.
That's really a separate question because it gets into the drain code. And so I'm going to let Scott and Rachel talk a little bit about City of Walker when it comes to permitting for soil erosion and stormwater, because I think that'll clarify some of the questions we have here.
So as this mining site transitions to a development site with the golf course reclamation plan, we will have to get a soil erosion permit in place. The plan should be pretty easy because you've had a soil erosion permit in the past, but we want to have a separate permit application for this use and kind of move it out of that mineral mining arena. And then, also looking at this, there's this proposed storm pipe. And this kind of ties into the drainage as well. That right now is just proposed. We will just have to look at that from a stormwater permitting standard, make sure it's sized correctly for the site, and look at what kind of water is coming into that, what kind of water is leaving, if we want to have a control structure, et cetera. Do you have?
You had sent an email out regarding a soil erosion fee. We sent back, and actually, this is kind of our play at a reclamation site. Well, not only reclamation, but it has the appropriate reclamation notes with topsoil and seed and stuff like that, which I think is what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Then it also has the acreage, and so the acreage, I guess as soon as you figure out what that fee is, then we can pay that fee.
Yeah, and so just what gets kind of goofy is that fee has always been calculated as part of the Mineral Mining Review Board. And so now I want to look at it from the soil erosion permitting perspective. And I believe, and I can't remember if I did, but I wanted to send you a soil erosion permit application to be filled out that kind of moves this more into that development stage. And then I was going to calculate fees with that based on whatever the restoration.
Which fees will be cheaper?
They'll be the same for the most part. There will be a small application fee, and the permit fee is $35.
If you could send that to Todd, and then that way we can make sure it gets done correctly.
Okay,
All right?
yeah, you're right, the plan does look pretty good. I should look over it one more time.
All right.
But with this, it's had all the soil erosion notes in the past. And I will also send him the stormwater permitting information.
Very good.
One observation from me, I think the plan that the planning commission approved is really the reclamation plan now. I think that's the way we crafted this, right?
It's an end use plan,
But
so
we
the-
skipped a step and we said, let's make this the reclamation plan so Dan doesn't go out there and put 1-on-5 slopes in, only to get us to check the box to go send the same equipment back out there again and make it fit the site plan review conditions.
Yeah, I think
So-
that the golf course, if I can jump in, the golf course end-use plan helped to justify some leniency on what we normally require in terms of grading on a reclamation plan. Like you said, the 1-on-5 final slope and the 30-foot do not disturb buffer are the two items that come to mind. So I think, in my view, the reclamation plan is kind of the bones of the end use. So it's the earthwork and the grading that leads to that end use, that the golf course is kind of the end use and programming plan. So it's, yeah, one and the same.
Okay.
I guess, Frank, one of the questions were, that both here and planning commission, do we have to get into that 30-foot buffer zone? And I guess I've pretty much contended all along that there's only maybe 250 feet along that east line, and that's why we wanted to go to 1-on-3. If we go 1-on-3, we really don't really know that there's no reason for us to get into that 30-foot buffer, and I guess right now we've agreed to stay out of that. If we can't do that, I guess we could deal with it as an on-site at the end, because basically all our property line
both the north side, the west side, and the south side is completed. So, I guess if you guys don't have a problem, I don't see why we can't agree to not get into that buffer and then look at where hole 2 is, or if we gotta modify that, we should be able to do that on site.
Would that be through the planning commission?
Yep, and that's why I think we bring up the planning commission approval, because I think they covered that 1-on-3
Right.
slope, and they gave you that flexibility. So.
We approved it as shown, but then Dan pledged to do the best he could to preserve what he could. But when he came in with a plan that showed it being disturbed, we couldn't very well just say, we'll accept this virtual plan that we don't see it, that shows it not being disturbed. So we approved what we saw in front of us, right? And I say we, because
Yeah.
they're helping Dan, I'm not a planning commissioner member.
Yeah, I think that's what the planning commission approved, yep.
Okay. And so just to clarify, and we'll eventually get to a motion here, but let me think out loud for a second. We definitely want to be clear that the mining operations will cease on March 1st, 2019. So whatever condition we
That's
create,
mining.
sand mining,
or Sand mining to go off-site.
off-site,
We're still allowed to take that sand and build our golf course and stuff like that.
cut and fill, that's
There's-
great.
Seems like there's a lot of work to do there with the cut and fill balance, right?
Well,
You got a lot of moving around on site though, no trucks out onto the road. That's where we're
trucks
headed.
There will be trucks coming in with dirt.
With fill.
Okay, I'll wait till my turn on that.
Okay, well, why don't you take your turn?
Well, Dan had a note that talked about how long vehicles can be bringing fill material in, and I think what we were looking for was more of a cut and fill balance where there wasn't gonna be this constant flow of more trucks and more trucks. Because it's not much different if they come in full and leave empty than if they come in empty and leave full. We wanna cut down on that as well.
We are gonna need some.
It looks like you are, a lot.
But, I guess your comment, well, I don't want you to come in with 500,000 yards. We're not doing that. But I can see where we probably take in 100,000 anyway.
Yeah, I'm thinking of it like a neighbor. You said the trucking was gonna stop, you put a date on this of March 1st, and now there's truck after truck after truck coming in here just pounding this.
Well, but I go up Bristol and I look at development up there and it's like, they're up there moving dirt. There's, it's all part of, the old is gone, the trucks from the old operation are gone, but the trucks from the new operation are gonna be there. Once that's completed, the trucks are gone. But so as far as the trucks going out with the load, yeah, and I understand where you're coming from, that you want the trucks to stop, but in essence, we want,
You want me done?
well, no, but we want the land, we gotta have topsoil and everything, we gotta have it reclamation done. And so as far as, we agreed on stopping the mining and the exit, but we gotta have, now this is the other phase of get it finished. And so then we talked about, I believe, then the 2020.
I guess maybe what I can do is,
I'm-
I would like to have a little bit of flexibility. I don't want to go out of 2020. I want this seated end of 19. So that means I got to be done August, September, bringing stuff in and shaping stuff up. So I think I can live with that as a condition. And that kind of takes care of some of the other concerns.
Seems like a good compromise to me.
What?
That seems like a good compromise to me.
Okay.
So then, sorry, you gotta hit the red button there. Can I jump in for a second? Yeah?
It's your
Okay.
meeting.
Well, it's not my meeting, it's a public meeting. There will be no further sand mine permit issued for this site,
I understand that.
okay? I just want to make totally sure. In the interim, you'll be working towards what Dan's identified, which is in section 34-308, permanent closeout of all on-site activities. When we built that part of the code, we made it a punch list, and it ends with as-built. So we can't officially give you a permit that says you're done, it's reclaimed appropriately until we get to as-built.
Well, and that's why we got the as-built coming in end of 2019 or 2020.
And that's what I'm backing up from. So the limiting factor is the as-built, because we know that that's the last step. So I think what would be wise is just to let this site move towards reclamation based on section 34-308 and based on their reclamation plan. And then we would hold an on-site meeting in October to verify the checklist.
That's fine.
By then, the site, according to Mr. Schimmel, will be final graded, seeded. We can see what kind of processes come along. It all depends on the weather this summer. And then we can start to check off some of the items on this permanent closeout. And then either late 19 or early 20, the as-builts come in and we put the final stamp on this one. I think that's probably the way to do it. Now, I'm going to encourage you to meet with Mr. Portfleet and his engineer to talk about personal issues that really are beyond the purview of this board. Because this board is, our purpose is just to look at the sand mining operation and not the regional drainage picture that may be coming, right-of-way issues, et cetera, from across municipal boundaries. This site is going to be regulated according to its plan. And it will be subject to soil erosion permits, which are issued by Walker, and stormwater permits. So the rest is really drain code and the details and the history of a lot of off-site drainage coming onto Mr. Portfleet's property. Because I don't think we can answer those questions today, and that's not really the purview of this board.
Some of those questions I can't answer either.
I think it'd be helpful if you can maybe take a few minutes after the meeting and talk to Mr. Portfleet and talk to Mr. Henderson. And you guys can work out, the details of the site.
Yeah, if he's serious enough to hire an engineer, it's probably worth you talking to him so that we don't all end up in a bigger room.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the way to go about it, because the site itself, the grade has been, let's be honest, the site has been pretty radically altered over the past 14 years, right? Coming up on 14. So drainage patterns should have been affected all over the place as this site was being dismantled and brought back, dismantled and brought back. All of that is subject to City of Walker regulation. Pass-through, watershed issues, right-of-way issues. Mr. Henderson, maybe you want to help us out here.
If you could press the red button when you move up there too.
Yeah, I forgot about that. It's right in the middle. Right in the middle.
Just the big speed.
There you go.
It's not red till you push it.
That's right.
Yeah, I've just gotten involved with this project in the last week, so I don't have a lot of history or background knowledge, but is it my understanding that there will be a stormwater permit issued at some point after the reclamation?
Just like any other site development.
So
yes.
the stormwater ordinance will apply to this commercial development as well as any other, as far as...
Right. But this site will be largely pervious, right? I mean, it's going to be grass. I think that the real difference is between very heavily forested woodland area, which maybe it was before,
Sure.
and a very dense vegetative golf course, which it'll be in the future. There's a little bit of a difference there, but we look at more impervious versus pervious when it comes to stormwater. So, will there be some changes? Absolutely. Will it be as significant as when the property to the north developed? I don't think it's going to be anything close to that.
Yeah, my only question would be, what were the original tributary areas? Whether it goes from woods to grass isn't a huge change, but if it's, 15 acres went to the east and now, 20 acres going to the west, that I think there should be some consideration given to the original tributary areas and where the water went. So
That's a good one for you guys to get together on and talk about.
Well, and I can answer that. The predominantly, it went underneath the power lines because it was a hill. And there was a portion that went to the north, cutting through hole 3 and
for?
Sure. Well, I'm not familiar on how long ago this mining permit was originally proposed or how long it's been.
2005.
2005, so there's probably a topographic survey of the site at that point that maybe, I think it's fair to ask that, you know, the developer's engineer take a look at the drainage patterns then and now and certify that there isn't any net increase. I believe the ordinance says up to a 100-year storm, but,
Yeah.
you know, I think that's a fair consideration. for
And
the
that's all
site
public
anyway.
information, the file is all public information. So if you want to take a look at that and compare,
Well, it kind of seems like it should be on the onus of the developer's engineer to review that
Sure.
and provide a certification in that regard, so.
Scott, what do you think? Now we're
We'll,
getting
we'll
into.
consider that with the stormwater permit, but this board's not looking at stormwater permits.
Yeah, and I
Set that
understood,
aside.
yeah, I understood that, and I advised Mr.
I'm not sure I want to get involved in regional stormwater issues and all of this.
But if we ask
Well-
you to show, you
You can
know,
ask me.
For this particular
yeah.
property.
let's leave it at that, Dan.
Yeah. Well, that's all I would like to add is that, you know, I think it's fair for my client to be provided, and for the city should expect a, you know, a certification from the developer's engineer comparing the original runoff to where we are now.
How do you want to handle that?
I'll
There'll
get
be,
with them.
there'll be a stormwater permit.
Yeah,
Stormwater permit?
that's why I assumed, and I advised my client that there will be a stormwater
Yeah.
permit, and that should all be supplied as part of that permit, so.
That was a condition of planning commission approval too, so stormwater
Yeah.
permits coming.
Yeah, ground cover is one thing, but, you know, the tributary areas and which is going which way is an important piece of that, so.
Okay. Well, if you can sit down with Mr. Portfleet and maybe grab Mr. Schimmel after the meeting and just clarify, you know, what we already discussed here and how there is a permit beyond this board
We understand that.
to
yeah.
regulate
Yeah,
stormwater.
yeah. Thank you.
Okay,
We need to do that, thank you.
okay, thank you. Okay, further comments? I threw a couple of ideas out there to try to keep this thing moving in the interim, and I will look for any motion that we have.
Will this be a motion to close the mineral mining permit?
I think that's probably good for the record to say that the mineral mining permit,
Will be
Mining
closed.
extraction.
yeah, extraction ends on March 1st, 19.
Okay. So I will create a motion, I never know the correct.
Yeah, you can draft a motion.
All mining operations to cease on March 1st, 2019. And all trucking activity for purposes of meeting section 34-308, permanent closeout of all on-site activities of the Walker City Code to achieve final reclamation to be ceased by September 1st, 2019. And then to submit a soil erosion application and a stormwater permit application by April 1st, 2019 for city review, and we will work through details and reviews after that.
And if I could add, in
What about the
October, we're going to hold that. The way this code is written is the bond won't be released until we give you that final closeout application approval.
What about the letter of credit?
I need a letter of credit. I haven't received one.
Aren't they one and the same, or do we have?
Yeah.
I guess they are the same, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. It's either a bond or a letter of
Yeah,
credit.
it's not a bond, it's a letter of credit.
So most
Right, right.
most are LLC.
It need to be, well, I think it already is.
I don't have anything in record. It may be, but I need something in record.
I don't know, mine was screwy and it renewed in October or something.
Okay.
But one
That
way or
might
another,
work
we'll
out
get
well,
it.
actually, because
What?
if it's 1 year, that might work out well if you can close it by next October.
The last subsection in the code says compliance with any conditions of approval attached to the closeout review is required before any performance guarantee is discharged or released. So,
I don't have a problem with that.
all right, we're going to go forward with that language. So we need one more year on that letter of credit. Okay. And I just wanted to add in there an on-site meeting in October to start going through the permanent closeout checklist. So if you would consider that, I'll add that to your motion.
I accept.
You are all right with me?
I'll add it to my second.
Okay, and Dan adds that to his support. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we will continue moving towards closeout. Mr. Schimmel, thank you for helping us out here. Mr. Portfleet, thank you for coming out. We appreciate that. And if you could have Mr. Henderson stay in contact with our staff, we'll keep you up to speed. All righty, any comments from the group?
Do you need to set some dates for follow-ups on things?
We're going to do that, and we have meetings in August for the 3 mines that were last time. We've got one in October for this one. So look, Andrea and Dan will help us out to schedule those.
Did we have some short-term ones, like a 3-month revisit? Do I remember that?
I think it was August.
Was that last year? 'Cause
Yeah.
all these meetings kind of run together after a certain number of
You're
years.
right, there was something we were looking for sooner than August on one of the mines we looked at last week. It was,
I think it was the
Stanley Orchards?
quarters, yeah,
Yeah, I think it
on
was,
that reclamation on
That
that
sounds
hill
right.
behind them.
Yeah. So we may have to have something even sooner.
That's why the minutes are really important. So I'll help you with the minutes to make sure they show a verifiable follow-up list. And then we can get those minutes to the applicants, and then it's on them to get us the follow-up stuff. Okay? Yes.
we going into general update mode?
General update mode, yes, we have a couple of minutes here.
So Commissioner, Board Member Kent was asking about the visioning workshop last week, or the meeting here last week on
Real
Tuesday?
quickly, I think
It went
this
fine.
came out the week before.
We are going to have interim reviews on, I think, all 3 of those mines for August, because there are some
Yes.
action items we were looking for over the next few months. So those Cordis, Good Ale, and Stanley Orchards.
And we're probably, Dan, going to say, let's meet out in the field on those, and then we can either hold a meeting in the field, or we can come back here after we do the review in the field. I think the group felt that only looking at these things once a year really leaves a lot of loose ends. So unless they're fairly easy, like the first 2 today, we want to do some follow-up mid-year. And it's good, I think, just to get out to the site and see the progress. You know, 2D doesn't do it.
Or even on soil erosion inspection,
Yeah,
something catches their eye, they bring it back and they'll, hey,
sure, agreed.
here.
And we let Rachel know that. If you see anything that's irregular out there, this board can meet anytime, you know, and I think we're moving towards that kind of procedure, more than just every February we stamp the plans and then go do what you do.
Good, thank you.
Okay. Anything further? Motion to adjourn from Mr. Kent, and I will support that.
You can't support that.
I can't support that. Mr. Connors, everybody else will support that. And we are adjourned as of about 2:37 PM. Thanks, everybody.